But we know there is activity all around the world, and we're seeing the commitments there from all of our major trading, just about all of our major trading partners around the world. And you see that coming from Korea, Japan, and now China, all committing to zero carbon. And this is all driving this number one enabler for energy productivity projects, that commitment. We also see that this commitment's coming from multiple sectors from multiple directions. So this is we see there from buildings to farms to banks saying that they're going to be doing much more rigorous testing on the carbon impact of finance as well. It's coming from multiple directions.
So what about here in Australia? Well, we know the implications of the rest of the world making these net zero by 2050 commitments and driving the decarbonisation journey are going to eventually be forced into Australia to make those commitments. We also know that all the sub-jurisdiction state governments and territory governments have made net zero by 2050 commitments here in Australia. So what we are seeking to do, and I think the power of unusual allies coming together and voicing and demonstrating that there are jobs economically prosperous for us to be decarbonising, it's going to be safe for future generations. So we have come together to build a collaboration called the Better Futures Australia Initiative, which was launched a couple of weeks ago. So our fourth reason for being cheerful is that many, many companies have made net zero by 2050 commitments. So here is just a handful globally, and in Australia, you know, we've had BP and Shell make those commitments. We've had many institutional companies, fast-moving consumer goods companies, cement companies, aluminium and energy companies. So, you know, that shift is going, we've got Qantas there. I mean, they don't know how they're going to achieve their goals, but what they do know is that they're on the journey and that making the commitments are actually driving that innovation going forward.
We're looking very much for system solutions and business model change. We're looking for transformative change rather than incremental change. We're not interested in tweaking boilers. We're interested in electrifying process heating and completely decarbonising. There's a real sense of urgency about action, and I agree with Monica's positive and creative look at progress, but I think it's all still much too slow, and we've really got to put the foot on the accelerator. That's why I like the fact that we're called RACE, because we really need to move quickly.
You can see that a smooth transition to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement, they're compared to a disruptive transition, which is the light green, are much, much smaller. So, and I think this is going to be an area where there's going to be increasing focus from central banks, financial regulators, investors, because I think at the end of the day, I think the common view amongst the institutional investment community is that the disruptive scenario is the one that's most likely to happen at the moment. We're not necessarily seeing governments moving towards getting us on a pathway to a smooth transition to net zero emissions. So the biggest risk which people are starting to focus on, I think, is this idea of a disorderly or a delayed transition.
The third element is measurable impacts. So financial services, the financial services sector, investment sector is pretty good, coming up with catchy labels and lovely imagery of people having a happy retirement. But increasingly, there's a focus on how does that translate into not just better financial returns, but actually a positive impact. If I'm investing in a green fund or a sustainable fund, then I want to see that it's my savings are actually making a difference. And that can get tracked in a range of different ways, and that's an area where investor metrics for tracking impact are developing strongly. Australian Ethical, we've set a net zero target by 2050 across our portfolios. We track our progress towards that target by looking at the emissions intensity of our portfolios compared to the relevant international and local benchmark. This is just looking at our share investments where the data is more readily available. So we're able to see both that, our investment screening is and engagement is producing portfolios which have lower emissions intensity, but also trending in the right direction. And it's emissions intensity is just one measure, and it's an imperfect measure. We also track our investment in renewables compared to the market. So, we're a multiple of 5 times our investment in renewables.
It's easy to get caught up in energy and climate policy here in Australia, and it's a challenging environment, I guess you could say. There's not a lot of great policy certainty here, but it's also important to understand, especially for those companies and those industries where the majority of their product is exported. It's perhaps even more important to understand what is going on in those export markets.
We're finding that the environmental sustainability is no longer the domain of a few left-wing greenies or a millennial audience alone. It's well and truly hit the mainstream. Most Australians feel some level of concern. 48% of Australians are extremely or very concerned about environmental sustainability. That's backed up by another 34% who are somewhat concerned. But alongside government, Australians are looking for business to show real commitment when it comes to sustainability. 58% think that big brands should set an example on environmental sustainability. And another 52% expect all businesses to be doing everything they can to be environmentally friendly.
The other thing about energy is that it's a great proxy for broader productivity programs. It's easy to measure. You can put a meter in a line, and you can calculate your multiplier on particularly maintenance savings, but also materials and consumable savings. So energy is a very powerful diagnostic for ensuring that you're managing your process well. And don't underestimate storage. We haven't really been able to evaluate the value stack of things like batteries, but also recognize that you store energy in many ways. So if you're running a large commercial building and you know that it's going to be a 45-degree day, the potential does exist to really, really cool your building at midday when the electricity cost is low, when the renewables penetration is high. So use your more available electricity, super cool your building, and then let it heat up as the electricity prices rise and the temperatures rise at 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Basically because these are all the levers in that triangle, they're all the levers we can pull to reduce our carbon emissions. And I designed it in such a way that it was meant to be like a hierarchy where we'd focus on energy efficiency and then solar and then biogas, then PPAs, and ultimately at the bottom our safety net, which I called it was our carbon offsetting to get us to that carbon neutral or net zero position. And it's important for me to illustrate it through this because, I wanted people to be focused on energy efficiency. That's where you save the money. That's where you get your people engaged, and that always is the number one priority as far as I'm concerned. So.
We supply high quality red meat into the markets, and so making stuff cold is actually core business for us, and it comes back to that fundamental thing of not only producing high quality Australian red meat, but making it cold as part of that supply chain and part of that business. So coming back to that, we want to be really good at making things cold, and that means being as productive as we can, and that's sort of how we've led this big energy productivity drive, and we've been lucky enough to have a fantastic partner in that space, which continues to help us execute on all of those initiatives.
The Mars hurdle rate for energy investment is $1 million for every 6 terajoules of energy saved. An energy reduction project based on today's energy rates could be as high as a 13-year payback and still secure funding based on prioritisations at the time. Typically, we're finding projects that exceed the hurdle many times over, and we use the hurdle factor to prioritise the available capital spend, which for Wadaonga has been around $500K annually. And the $500K is backed by the $1 billion global commitment.
We certainly saw that when an audit is done well, the paybacks are very good nearly every time. I said there that the good news is if you have lots of leaks, you're not alone. The bad news is you are losing a lot of money.
So as they said, I'm Warwick from Compressed Air Alliance. We were born to eliminate the compressed air waste. My basic beliefs is compressed air is extremely expensive. Compressed air systems are very poorly maintained. It's very poorly understood. And I often find that it is simply abused as a resource in manufacturing. And this is not only in Australia, but globally. I just walk into pretty much every system I see and find that compressed air is just being used where it just shouldn't be used. What I find is that you need to get the basics right. What we do at the Compressed Air Alliance is we measure the system and we establish a baseline so we know how the system's performing, what the system's going to do as we make changes, and also where it's at right now. So we can establish the cost of compressed air, we can establish how much it's costing you to run, what it's costing you to do, everything about it is doing it.
Okay, so the thing about this is that we can capture a lot of multiple business benefits. And in many ways, once you start looking at what alternatives can offer, you start to see that really the savings on energy costs, which are generally the main focus of most audits and assessments, are in fact kind of the cream on the cake, because the cake is actually business benefit and productivity improvement across the board.
The next point is you've got to value the double benefits of reduction gains in energy efficiency, and we've heard this as a recurring theme the last couple of days as well. So if you're looking at a production machine, if you've got stable pressures on it, it's going to be more reliable, you're going to have greater productivity. The little graphic on the right there, and I don't think you can see it, we fast logged an actuator. If we were to fit regulators to the ports of this actuator, which it wasn't regulated, we'd get a 58% air saving, but we'd also be able to operate the machine 19% faster. So that's a nearly 20% productivity gain and saving air at the same time. I did a project on wasted work, and we had an 82% air saving, and we could cycle 60% faster. And that was a bottleneck on this customer's production line, and they could actually run the whole plant faster because of it. So that's a direct gain in productivity.
Today, demand response is something that happens on a handful of days per year, and can involve a specific action for a handful of days per year. Where all this really comes together is as a virtual power plant, where it's not just about something that happens a couple of times a year, but might start to be something that happens on a daily basis. So where we're going to start to see more and more behind the meter batteries coming into business customers, electric vehicle fleets, as well as more automation of processes and more flexibility built into processes, such that rather than demand response being something that happens a handful of times per year, this is actually happening in the background day in, day out. The 5-minute market is going to be a really interesting change, so that we're potentially assets which haven't been suitable for demand response before. I think the previous session was about air compressors. You can't imagine turning an air compressor off for a very long time, but if you have a big enough receiver, maybe turning a large air compressor off for 5 minutes is going to be feasible in the future. So it's going to be really interesting to see the change as as demand response matures as a product, into the future.
Now the next customer, this one's a full portfolio, and so you can kind of see the load here is hovering around the 20 to 25 megawatts. So it's a sizable load, and it's a full portfolio performance. Now if we look at what happened over here, they the spot price picked up from $300, whatever it was, up to $14,500. And at that moment, they load shedded across all of their sites, remaining, a little bit of a base load. But during this event as well, while they were avoiding the spot price, there was a RERT event called during this period. So as they were able to perform during this phase, there was an actual event the day after, and so they did it again. And so they made a RERT payment during this period, but they also happened to secure the spot avoidance savings as well by being able to shed their load during this peak price. Now, where energy orchestration and VPPs and all these other things come into it, the shaded line behind the graph is their solar generation component. And so when we look at these times when the price reached 14,500, they shed their load, so they're not paying that. But while they were generating at that price. And so during that period, they also happened to also generate, $500,000 worth of export. You kind of combine all these activities with the RERT payments, the spot avoidance, and the solar generation revenues. We're talking well over $1 million. I think that number 500K is probably underestimated. So we're talking anywhere between $1.5 to $2 million across 2 days for one customer in the order of 20 to 25 megawatts. So, when we look at this one example, while this is definitely one of the more high valued examples and well executed examples, this is where we see the industry going when we can start to operate load, manage their generation assets, and being able to orchestrate all of these activities on the energy market.
The other thing is that you can change that extremely quickly. So this is Japan, and I think it's just this chart that just absolutely blows my mind. Japan effectively, if you see the very dark line there, they switched off their entire nuclear capacity after the Fukushima in 2011. And so you basically lost about 30% of the generation capacity in the energy market in pretty much about 12 months. An extraordinary loss of capacity. So, you think about how much we freaked out with Hazelwood closing. Imagine losing 30% of your generation in just under a year. Now, they did put in more gas. They did put in some oil-fired generation because it's Japan, but that was quite short-lived. That's the sort of mid-tone grey in there. But the biggest thing they did is they went to emergency energy conservation in the sort of orange, and then they shifted onto more sensible energy efficiency and demand response. And that basically replaced about a third of their nuclear fleet. And as you can see, that was sort of sustainably in place within just 5 years. So an extraordinary amount of capacity can be brought online very, very quickly.
I guess start out with what the government's reforms, the New South Wales government's reforms around electricity and energy and emissions as an integrated package. The government is got a reform package that's quite comprehensive, and it's aiming with a clear net zero by 2050 target and an interim target of 35% reduction by 2030. One of the characteristics of this package is that it is trying to make sure that our energy network is reliable, affordable and sustainable, as well as fast track emissions from outside the energy sector, emissions reduction. The whole package of reforms is very clearly pitched at helping the New South Wales economy prosper through decarbonising. So it's the economic benefits of decarbonising front and centre in the plan. We're not trying to say, what is the cost to the economy of getting rid of emissions. We're very much pursuing the the opportunities that come from greater efficiency, new markets, new opportunities. Two of those Priority 1 programs I'll just mention a little bit briefly that people may have heard about is the Emissions Intensity Reduction Program. This one is a flagship program, and it's targeted with $450 million over 10 years to support the some of the largest emitters in New South Wales to transition their plant, equipment and processes to low emissions alternatives. So this will be a long-term program. Those sort of reforms very much depend on the business cycle or the asset life cycle of a lot of those heavy emitting industries. So there'll be a program to find the best emissions reduction in some of those really large emitters, the biggest emitters in New South Wales. Energy efficiency program is another of the programs, and I know that this audience doesn't really need explanation. One of the things about that we're trying to push, to move to in the energy efficiency is really to also include that it's an energy modernisation, so more energy productivity, energy use, not just efficiency, more efficient use of the energy that we're using now, but to accelerate the modernisation of energy use and the sophistication of energy use across a range of sectors, in particular manufacturers and other heavy users.
Before I get into the barriers, one thing was very clear is that there isn't a lack of private finance out there, especially for energy projects. In fact, 9 out of 10 businesses that we spoke to that applied for private financing for energy projects were successful in getting it. I think credit to the Clean Energy Finance Co's program here, partnering with some of the mainstream financiers, some of the big 4 banks, in sort of making them feel a lot more comfortable with the type of asset finance that is involved in energy efficiency, etc. So essentially, we didn't see this being a sort of direct barrier. Most businesses, if they've got a really good business case and they're creditworthy, they should be able to get the finance for the project. There were other barriers identified, however, and maybe a lot of these will probably ring true with some of the audience today. Firstly, the fact that businesses didn't even get to the point where they were considering energy efficiency projects. So it wasn't a priority. But what's interesting here is that reducing of energy operating costs was in the top 5. However, energy efficiency was ranked around 11. And which sort of told us that they are not equating investing to energy measures with reducing energy costs, and perhaps they're looking more from a just using energy wisely within their business. The second thing really speaks to the first priority barrier, which is the fact that there is a perception where energy efficiency doesn't necessarily equal to energy savings, and they do need the convincing of these potential savings, this equating of energy savings to dollars saved. And finally, and I think this is more relevant to the finance side of things, but again, a knowledge barrier, the fact that businesses are simply not aware of the financing options available. And I can say confidently that a lot of SV engaged businesses were more aware than sort of the general businesses out there. But that's because of our effort of trying to make them aware of all the finance options available in energy. So almost half the businesses were just simply unaware of options relating to energy projects.
And our mandate for as it is now and how it has been for the past 8 years is about improving the competitiveness of renewable energy technologies, and thereby helping to increase the supply of renewable energy in Australia. It's stated that we will have a broader mandate going forward, subject to legislative changes, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but that'll open up opportunities for ARENA to be more directly supportive of energy efficiency, energy productivity opportunities, and in fact also non-energy emissions reduction opportunities that we think over time will have value as value gets attached to low carbon products from customers and supply chains in the future. But essentially just looking at some of the options from a renewable perspective and how what temperature ranges those can address. And we think that, you know, the conclusion from that process heat report that I mentioned earlier is that there are viable renewable options for all temperatures and all systems and processes. So we don't really have a technology problem, although clearly technology as it scales will become cheaper and more obvious. I think what we have is a sort of an incumbency problem, that we just haven't experienced these alternatives. We haven't turned our minds to it fully. We haven't figured out how to finance these things properly. But certainly from a technology perspective, as I said to you, there's electrical options all the way through from low temperature heat through heat pumps, all the way through to electric arc furnaces to make steel from direct reduced iron, which you can green that whole supply chain, for example, and then everything in between. There's bioenergy options where you can switch from a fossil fuel like LPG or natural gas straight through to biomass or even biofuel, depending on the needs. There's solar thermal options, which is essentially those heliostats or mirrors in the deserts that all focus the solar energy on a receiver. That receiver captures heat and often can capture electricity too. And there's some fantastic opportunities for food processing and manufacturing with regards to companies like Raygen or Vast Solar, who are really innovating in the space in Australia. And we're supporting companies like that to have options there. Geothermal is another one, generally thought of now as just a low temperature opportunity in the aquifers in the Artesian Basin, providing up to 60-degree heat, for example. Limited opportunities perhaps. There's also just ground source heat pumps and heat pumps generally as an opportunity, and we're exploring ground source heat pumps, which you can call, I guess, in one form geothermal, but it's getting heat from the earth effectively to provide through to space conditioning. And then hydrogen, as I said, is just sort of infinitely flexible fuel that we can create entirely cleanly from electrolysis, which is solar and wind energy through an electrolyzer that splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen, and you can then consume that hydrogen in an industrial process or use it for heating purposes. So as I said, I just mentioned a little bit about ARENA's portfolio. I've talked to you about the MSM milling biomass fuel switch project, which is in the top left picture, the canola crops that you can see. We've done some interesting work with a company called Glacium around phase change materials for more efficient cooling. And we've got a few projects that will go live with using that technology, and that'll become demonstrations that others can look at. We've got a bit of a program going where we've supported ClimateWorks, Climate Kick and others in what we call the Australian Industry Energy Transition Initiative, which is really about investigating pathways for all sorts of industrial businesses to decarbonise and to switch to new technology. And we've supported the establishment phase so far in that program of work. And then we've supported A2EP in a process heating studies and investigations in the manufacturing industry, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So just as I mentioned, A2EP, and I'll maybe leave Jared to fill in some of the blanks because he's much closer to it than I am, but we're almost through phase one, which is investigating opportunities for those brands that you can see on the left-hand side of the page to look at energy efficiency, productivity, and renewable energy opportunities, and very encouraged by what we've seen there. And I think there's been some interest in others joining. We're about to enter, or sort of underway with phase two of that program. And really, for us, the relationship that we have and the funding we provided to A2EP allows us to get into an area that we wouldn't naturally have the ability to talk to all of these companies individually as ARENA. But certainly for the bigger projects, that reach sort of the $1 million, $5 million, $10 million grant opportunities, we'd love to have a direct relationship and explore real in the ground products that we can projects that we can put forward, but then demonstrate and give people confidence about what else can happen.
McCain is committed reducing targets across our operations and supply chain, and that's a key enabler within the finance community to drive that agenda and support the global team. And our global team globally is build a roadmap which clearly outlines our set targets and with obviously limit additional costs to our business. So within the framework, having a set target, but also considering business constraints is key. So the set program at McCain consists of 6 work streams, and it basically rolls down to continuous improving the quality and scope of our CO2 monitoring and reporting program. So you need to be able to monitor and report on the progress you're making. Resource efficiency in planning and execution inside the plants is key. Renewable energy generation and procurement outside the plants is key. Engaging and influencing our suppliers to reduce emissions. And that's a key component on obviously on potato, on frying oil, packaging supply and transportation of finished goods. In addition to that, developing a carbon offset sourcing strategy. And adapting a roadmap to changes to global carbon pricing to build most cost-efficient programs. So those are 6 core work streams that we use within McCain to monitor our progress.